So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Sandra Ferry, the President and CEO of the Aurora Chamber of Commerce. And this session today is being brought to us by Desjardins Insurance as part of our Accelerate Business Recovery Hub. So today's topic is new legislation, the right to disconnect. Are you ready? The Employment Standards Act legislation, the right to disconnect, came into effect in Ontario in June 2022. Most employers will comply with the respective policy, but how they practice this policy and value work-life balance will make the difference within their organization and bottom line. So today here presenting for us is Luisa De Jesus. As the founder and president of LD Human Resources, Luisa is a highly motivated and results-driven human resources professional with over 20 years experience in HR. Luisa is a certified human resources professional and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Toronto. She also graduated with honors, obtaining her Human Resources Management Certificate in 2010. Her expertise spans professional and financial services, construction, travel and tourism, IT, not-for-profit, and retail. Her key strengths include strategic consulting, performance management, succession planning, recruitment and employee relations, organizational development and learning, compensation and benefits. Luisa is committed to high professional standards that link HR best practices to business objectives, delivering results within changing environments. So thank you for joining us today. Luisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Thank you all for having me. And I hope that today you are disconnecting from work to attend a little bit and get some information here. So as Sandra mentioned, we will be touching on, this legislation that came into place in June of this year, after blurred lines of work and home, I would say, with the pandemic, where many of us were forced to sort of pivot and work from home, given sort of what was happening. So we'll touch on the right to disconnect. As Sandra mentioned, I work at, and I own and manage LD Human Resources. I have an amazing team that complements our expertise, I would say. We've been in business for 5 years this year. Very exciting that we've reached an incredible milestone. I would say we probably have about maybe 9 team members now, mix of consultants and junior generalists in that sense. And really what we do is we support small to medium-sized businesses, as well as some large enterprise organizations, I would say, not just within the GTA, but across Canada, and some, I would say, globally have some subsidiaries that we support as well within, their Canadian business. And it's really, as Sandra mentioned, everything and anything related to HR, which is really anything related to your people. So our solutions are pretty versatile in the sense that everyone has a different budget and need. So we work around what the client's requirements are to be able to support them and meet their business objectives through their people, so they can see the results hit their bottom line and have a very happy work family in that sense. So what we'll be talking about today is really the right to disconnect. So what is it? Why is it important in general? So the right to disconnect, and we'll get into that, but it's really employers that are have 25 or more, which is the legislative requirement. But I would say it's important for every organization to have a good work-life balance. So we'll talk a little bit more about the work-life balance. Who is responsible? So what is everyone's role in this part of, or this new legislation? What's the impact if we're not compliant? I'm sure you all have heard about the most recent sort of trend or term around quiet quitting. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how it really does relate to the right to disconnect. I think it's almost like a movement, if you will. And then in general, some communication best practices. I did add a little bonus to our session today, being that we had a recent legislative update come into play just a couple of weeks ago called electronic monitoring, So I thought it'd be a good opportunity today to share with you a little bit more about, well, what is that? What do we have to do? And again, the importance of ensuring compliance, not only from a legislative requirement, but also from a workplace culture perspective. So we'll touch on that as well towards the end of the session before we get into the Q&A, which I'd love to offer each of you some opportunity to ask questions or even comments or ask whatever it is you've got me here today for. Any questions before we get right into it? All right. So what is the right to disconnect? Well, as mentioned, it did come into play in June of 2022. It is required for organizations with 25 or more employees. And this is really, in terms of sort of the term or the definition, it is for employers to ensure that employees or team members are not engaging in work-related communications, activities, emails, phone calls, video, anything to do with work after their work hours, so that they're free from work performance. Okay, but what does that really mean? I mean, in today's day, everyone is connected to their phone. We do have our emails always with us. I think as individuals, it's hard for us to shut off. And as I mentioned, as we worked through a pandemic, many of us had this blurred line, right? We used to go to the office and we get up, we go, we'd physically be there, and we get in the car, come home, and we're finished work, right? However, with the opportunity to now work remotely and be able to connect at any time, really, and get your tasks done, it's a very different world that we live in. I find that individuals have a hard time with creating a space where they're actually having that work-life balance. So and depending on the organization and where we're working and the hours of work and subsidiaries or other individuals from a service perspective that you're supporting, we work in a global economy. So our finish time at work at 5 o'clock here may be someone's midday, and you're still getting emails. So how do we work around these things, right? How do we make sure that we're not, that we're preventing burnout, I think is the main piece, that we don't have, and we'll talk about it in just a minute, we don't have quiet quitting taking place, and that we're supportive of our team members' work-life balance, and most importantly, their mental well-being, okay? So, we really need to have that opportunity to de-stress. So, what are some of the benefits? The benefits, if we encourage sort of the right to disconnect in that sense. I mean, in general, we have individuals that are refreshed and more productive when they come to work. And from an employer perspective, well, when you have a happy work culture and team members, then they're going to be producing and they're going to be infectious in terms of their positive energy to the other members within the team. I like to give it, I always give the analogy of the teacher. I know it's maybe, for those of you that know teachers in the profession, if they've got a really great principal and they're happy, well, guess what? Their kids are going to learn and they're going to be excited to go to school every day, right? Just like how it translates to, from a business perspective, you have happy customers, you're going to have, or happy team members, you're going to have happy customers because they're enjoying the experience and the service, and they're going to come back, and it's going to be a very positive effect on your bottom line, right? So in general, not only is it important from a work-life balance and ensuring that we have a separation between work and home, but it also is definitely very positive from a mental well-being as well as a business operational perspective. So we talked a little bit about some of these important factors. As I mentioned, it avoids burnout, definitely improves physical health. So when we talk about, well, how, Luisa, we're not sitting in, or we're not faced with sort of a physical workforce in our environment. Let's say we're in an office. how does that improve physical health? Well, the reality is that from a physical perspective, stress definitely is the huge factor, contributor, if you will, to physical illness, right? And you think about all the lost productivity and impact that has on disabilities within the workplace. Not that's one part, but also from a physical well-being, from a personal perspective, it's frustrating when you aren't able to move or do certain things that you used to be able to do. And then it also, as I mentioned, will impact your mental health as well. So physical health is definitely impacted by mental health, which is the importance of ensuring we have balanced life from work and have that opportunity to really de-stress. And when we have more time and we're having that balance, well, from a physical and mental well-being, we have the time to be able to lead a healthy lifestyle, right? Food prep, exercise, get out for a walk, make sure we get all our water in, all those great things. And so when we have that, again, that balance increases that team engagement, excitement to go to work and collaborate and work with your team, productivity, improving definitely retention. And in today's day, it's very difficult to find talent. And in general, I think it's important to always try to keep that talent within your group so that you have that long-term success, reducing cost of turnover, and really strengthening your employer brand. So there's definitely many advantages to have in having a positive work-life balance. And so, as I mentioned, the alternative sort of negative impact would be the opposite of all this, right? And increased sort of absenteeism, low productivity, toxic work environments, negative employees because they're not happy, right? And they don't have that time for their own personal well-being. So who is responsible for this, right? What is everyone's responsibility in ensuring that we have a very positive or balanced work life? Well, it's really like a health, it's part of, I would say, almost like health and safety. It's everyone's business. It's everyone's role to participate in this. So I can very well encourage my team members to take a break, to do, make sure they take their lunch, get out to take a walk. But if I'm not modeling that, then you're not really encouraging and demonstrating those healthy habits for them to mirror. And we really, as leaders, as employers, it has to be ingrained in everything that we do, not just within our own activity and support or balance or guidance towards our team members, but from a organizational perspective, we should really have practices and policies in place that allow us systematically to have the balance. So we, as I mentioned, we have a global workforce now. The other thing is we have adapted with certain ways, and a lot of individual workplaces have flexible environments now, right? So, if you have a commitment, let's say that there's still certain limitations from a resource perspective with COVID. COVID is definitely, pandemic is over per se, but it's very much still among us. And I can share with you a personal experience in terms of how there's no more or limited resources. I have a family member very close to me, my stepfather, that has dementia. And the reality is the supports in the community are limited. Think about that workforce in general. There's a shortage, they're burnt out, PSWs, nurses. So, to care for that individual, for individuals that have a primary role in caregiving for their elder parents, for example, or those that have certain needs, you may need to provide them with flexibility still. And so that could be, hey, I'm on morning duty. Can I work a little bit later? There's a reality to making that work, right? And providing the flexibility within your team members' availability. Really, we should be working towards performance. If it's great, it's a great sort of contributor in the organization, why risk that if you can make it work, if it's sustainable for your business operation? Obviously, if it's a physical sort of role, they have to be at the office at a certain time and it really doesn't work, that's a different story. But we've worked in an environment where we've had to be flexible. Kids were at home learning. So we've learned how to adjust expectations as employers. And I think a lot of us have seen that, those individuals are working harder and even more so not having sort of the balance. So we really need to encourage it and model it. So things like some organizations, what they've done is they have even instilled, okay, we're all going to have a 15-minute break today at lunch and do a stretch. So like you're encouraging that break. The other thing that's important, again, in terms of modeling that is if we are working after hours sometimes as employers. So, I think, David, you mentioned about the small business owner. Well, sometimes they're very busy and they got many hats on, and the only time they have to catch up on things is in the evening. As a business owner, it's important for you to have that balance and break, but sometimes you do have those times where you have deadlines, you have to kind of work towards it, plow through. What's important is that you provide that transparency to say, I'm not expecting a response, or make sure that you're using the tools within Outlook and do a send delay so that team member doesn't get your email until the following morning, and then they're not reading something on their de-stress or can disconnect from work time that's going to stress them out all night, when really the next day is not going to make a big difference for them to see this email or to action something. It's about the impact. The other thing that's important, as I mentioned, is with the pandemic, we have all suffered trauma. It's not normal for us to have been locked in our homes. A lot of people really suffered and adjusted sort of the way that they have learned sort of in general how to operate, right? So mental health and illness, I would say, is definitely something to be aware of and is on the rise. We want to make sure that we're checking in with our team members just in general, how's it going? You want to sort of have that relationship where they feel comfortable and can share with you where they're struggling. So if there's other resources that could help them to achieve the best balance, you're having an open dialogue about it, and they're recognizing maybe where the priorities are that they need to focus on because perhaps they've taken on too much. So we want to set those clear expectations, collaborate with our team members, making sure we're keeping that communication going at all times. The other thing, as I mentioned, is from an employee perspective. So this is employers modeling, ensuring, on the opposite, you want to have those open conversations. You need to be able to be kind and tactful if you feel that, you need to set a boundary, but have that conversation to understand the impact. And perhaps there's other resources that you're not aware of that your employer can offer. So always ensure that you're having those conversations, speak up, take the time for yourself, make sure you're blocking the time to get your work done, to have a walk, or make sure you have a break for your lunch, whatever it might be, because the reality is sometimes we're all kind of chained to our computer. We haven't got up, and that's not healthy, right? So everyone plays a part. It's important to ensure that we are modeling the behavior, and then we're not unrealistic. If you're sending communications, which is very reasonable sometimes after hours, just ensure that you either put a disclaimer saying, no need to respond, or perhaps we're putting that send delay if it doesn't need to be sent out in that moment, that they can receive it the next morning. It's a really simple, quick fix to not impact sort of negatively people that are perhaps not, that they're de-stressing at night, right? And that's not their work time per se. And I would say flexibility and open communication is the key. And so with that, as I mentioned, this is something that's required for employers of 25 or more. But why not encourage these things that I've mentioned and ingrain them in the culture so that you have a productive and healthy work-life balance for your team, regardless of size and requirement? So what's the impact of not complying? Well, I mean, we do need to have a policy. So not, I'm sharing with you these pieces, but the reality is you need to have a policy that's going to outline sort of the details of how you're respecting the legislation. What is your take on the right to disconnect? And, we obviously have a requirement from the ESA ensuring that we're providing the breaks through work and eating periods and vacation and public holidays and all those pieces. But the reality is we do not really have to provide them with the right to disconnect, but the non-compliance, like in the sense of, can someone come to you and say, oh, they don't allow me to take a break? Can we bring this forward? Well, yes, you can. You can, as an employee, do that. But the reality is at that point, perhaps that employee is already burnt out. So the huge and the biggest impact is that you're losing that team member. You're creating a culture that doesn't provide any breathing room or balance, where you're going to have burnout. And really, we're not sustaining long-term relationships with our team. We're not improving or increasing productivity and engagement. So that is going to be your biggest impact of non-compliance. In terms of enforceability, there's nothing really in place from a fine perspective per se right now. However, again, it's the whole piece of that impact to your business for those individuals that are either disconnecting themselves and taking it upon themselves from leaving, or really I call it, they're quitting and staying, right? Which is almost another term of this quiet quitting. Yeah, I'm going to do the work. I'm going to fly under the radar. I'm going to adjust and respond to things as I need to. But there's really no, engagement that they're excited and really being effectively as productive as they can be with having an employer that is going to encourage the balance, that is going to promote not just mental but physical well-being through these sort of actions that I've described them. Okay, so you've all heard of the term of quiet quitting. So what is it? I'm going to go back here. Okay, so what is, I'm going to ask the group here, what does this term mean to you? When you hear quiet quitting, what is it that you think it means?
Work to rule.
Sorry?
I said work to rule.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
start at 9. I don't do anything before 9. I have my lunch, or excuse me, let me go further. I have my break at 10:30. I do nothing between 10:30 and 10:45. I have my lunch at noon. Don't bug me till 1. I have my break at 3:30. I'm off at 5. Leave me alone.
Good. I like that. Anyone else?
I was basically going to say the same thing, that you do what you have to do, the bare minimum to get by, but don't go above and beyond.
Yeah.
So definitely it is like a work to rule when you think about sort of a unionized environment. Non-unionized environment, it could be seen as quiet quitting, but it also could be seen as, maybe they are getting their work done. Okay, I'm just going to flip to the next slide here. Definitely they're getting their work done, but they're just doing what's required, or perhaps they're putting that extra effort in, but it's only to a certain threshold, okay? Because they feel that perhaps they're not heard, they're not acknowledged, they're not appreciated, and I'm just going to go and clock in and clock out. And really, that is so bad, right? We think about how, what kind of a workplace culture is that, right? I think about, from a team culture perspective, well, if I'm coming in and I'm putting my best foot forward and I'm working hard because I want to do great things and reach the organizational objectives and I want to grow my career and I'm doing all this great stuff, and then I'm working beside someone that is basically working to rule, as you mentioned, David, right? Like we're just doing the bare. Well, I'm going to start to get a little bit bothered, if you will, right? I'm going to say, well, why am I working so hard when this individual beside me is probably making the same amount of money and getting by with and not having any stress or not having. So, what in fact ends up happening is that it creates this culture of sort of complacency where we're just going to do what we need to do, and we're not going to really push the boundaries. We're not going to be innovative. We're not going to want to learn and understand the full picture to offer a better service or product or whatever it is. We're not going to challenge each other to do better, because there's no point, because, you know, from a team perspective, you know, one person is really, or a few people are not doing something, so why should I bother? So, you know, in terms of the impact, that's huge, right? That is definitely gonna maybe maintain your bottom line, but definitely it's probably gonna have a negative impact, right? We're gonna see challenges within the business as we have always growth objectives. Well, how can you grow with a culture that is doing the minimum, right? And so the reality is that why do people work to rule? Like, why is it that they're doing? I mean, the realistic aspect is that most people, when they get up in the morning, they want to contribute. They want to feel a sense of purpose. They want to do something that's going to make them feel amazing that day, right? So I don't think they're waking up and saying, oh, I'm not going to do anything at work today, every day. And I don't really feel like it, you know, because it's not going to give them really that feel good inside. They want to feel that they've got purpose every day and they're doing something, right? And truly the reality is all we have to do as employers is have conversations, understand why is it that they're working to rule? What are the problems that they're seeing? Is it a process? Is it that, you know, when we go back to the right to disconnect, is it that there's not enough balance? We don't have resources to support, because many have had to do more with less, right? So how can we effectively navigate through that together? What am I going to do as an employer, as a leader, to support that individual? How am I going to respect that person's boundaries and personal sort of circumstance that they need in order to come to work refreshed and excited to do their job? So, you know, one of the things that we look at is, and I would say that a lot of individuals look at, is when they go to work, now they've got this COVID clarity. They want to make sure that they are aligned with the organization's objectives, not just but their mission, their vision, their values. They want to make sure that why, you know, their purpose is aligned with the purpose of the organization. And so if there's a disconnect in that, in the culture, in the way that they're operating, you're either going to lose them from a turnover perspective, they're going to quit, or it's going to cost you if you have to exit them yourself, or I would say that this is the worst one. They're going to quit and stay, right? And that's going to really impact the rest of your team members in terms of how are they operating and supporting sort of your business in general. So even though this legislation we talk about, the right to disconnect, it's for 25 and under, it really should be for everyone. You know, initially when this legislation came out, I'll tell you personally, I went, this is ridiculous. Who is going to really say, oh, I'm not working past 5 o'clock, when they really want to work hard to get the next promotion? And people that are disadvantaged or that feel that they're putting in extra time, they're going to stop doing that? Probably not. What it's saying is that, so this is where my mind says, like, how can they put this sort of work to rule in place, right? But the reality is it's a really, it's unfortunate that legislation has to come out to say this is important for the well-being of our community, and this is going to be positive in terms of the impact to your organization if you recognize the importance of work-life balance. There's no reason why that person can't work extra hard or extra hours to achieve that next sort of promotion, as long as they're working smart. It's just a matter of respecting their peers along the way and not having unrealistic expectations and pushing certain things that really are not realistic from a timeline perspective. You know, most businesses also have ebbs and flows. You got to work a little harder in certain, I can tell you in an accounting firm, I'm very familiar with, you know, forget about having a conversation with any accountant in the months of March, April, for sure, right? February as well, right? But most have blackout periods. So they're working a little hard, But guess what? In the summertime, they're all on the golf course. So as long as there's a good balance and we're being fair about when your business, you know, similar with construction, they're usually very, very busy in the summer months. But come, you know, certain seasonal roles, well, this is when they have their balance. But we need to be respectful and, you know, day to day recognize signs of burnout. How do we, when do quiet quitting, when someone's not really operating how they normally do in their contribution, having open conversations so that we can make sure we're having the right balance and receiving that feedback and embracing it like it's a gift, because the fact that they're comfortable to share with you is value. That's, you know, that's it. That's just like our clients. We want to hear back from so they can improve the experience in general, and then eventually adjust here and there a little bit to be able to have a positive impact, which will positively impact your bottom line with your increased productivity and happiness factor at work, right? So what do we do to make sure that our employees are disconnecting? Making sure that when they're not working, sometimes someone might take a day off, they might forget, or they're off in the morning, just an appointment. Put your out of office on. This way you're not stressing about the emails that are coming in, and you're setting that expectation, that boundary. You've already told whoever is sending this message that you can't respond to them right away, or that you're occupied. Sometimes if I'm out at even at a client event for the day, I'm still working, but as long as I'm letting whoever it is know that I'm not going to respond in the normal time because I'm tied up, right? I've got this sort of meeting. And I'm seeing now some people every day are putting after 5 o'clock, I'm unavailable, I'll return to your message at the next business day. That might be something that might be effective for organizations that are in a global environment where there's different time zones, because they don't know where you're located, or if they do, they might think that, okay, you're still available because you work in this global environment. Well, if that's not the case, let's express it. Let's be clear as in a second point in setting sort of those expectations about response time. So I'll get back to you by this day, or if you're on vacation, I'm not going to get back to you until next week, but in the interim, if it's urgent, contact this person, right? So really setting those boundaries and making sure that we're communicating effectively. The other thing it says here is to, you know, make sure that we're giving that opportunity for people to switch off. We're having a lot more virtual meetings. We're doing Zoom calls. We're on screen time all the time if you're working in a virtual environment. And the fact that most are not at work full time, we're losing that that break from screen time, right? I'm really not getting up to go and check my dog all the time at home, for example, or no one's at the door, no one's here, and I don't have any colleagues, right? So whereas at work, you get that break. You're getting up, you're going to the water cooler, you're going to take a lunch with a colleague, you have a coffee and chit chat, and it's still giving you that virtual break. So making sure that we're breaking from the screen, but also when we talk about sort of limiting the hours and the time, if we're always in meetings, how is it that we're going to get the work done? This is a challenge I think that many of us have. And one of the things I started to know is that if I have an hour meeting, I'm booking an hour and 15 minutes so that I am not back to back, because oftentimes I'm in the middle of like the 4th meeting of the day and I'm like, I will be right back. I need a bio break. Like I have not gotten up, right? Not only is it not good for mental well-being, but physically you need to stretch your legs. You need to have that break. And again, when are we getting the work done if we're always in virtual meetings? So ensuring that you're encouraging your team members to block time in their calendar for time to do work, or for that 15-minute break that they need, and having that flexible schedule and really sticking to that. Sometimes urgent things come up, you got to go into your block time, but if that's your block time, that's because you need things that you need to get done, right? The other thing is, people have switched, as I mentioned, to working remotely since the pandemic. So from a hybrid work environment, if you have individuals that are working from the office now, this is a big one. Someone asked me this the other day, Luisa, what do you think about enforcing back to work at the office, in office. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you're going to force your team members to go to the office, that might very well be further for them now, because many people have relocated given sort of the remote work life. And they're going to go to that office and they're going to sit at a desk and talk on their virtual calls all day. What is the purpose, right? Why is it that they need to now just spend 2 hours, let's say, commuting in the car, when they could have a much more flexible schedule in their day from that lack of commute time? So I encourage you to or just give consideration to what kind of a hybrid work environment is it that I'm expecting? Why do I want people back in the office? Myself as well. I want to have team members in the office so we have that camaraderie. It's so important from a culture perspective. But I'll tell you, unless we're going to be together and collaborate and meet about, have a meeting about something where we can do this in person safely, well, there's no point for us to be there if I'm gonna sit alone at my desk. Might as well do that at home than at work. So that's a piece that I would say that we're modeling sort of a very healthy balance, and then it's reasonable, because if it's not reasonable, well, then you're going to have frustration and you're going to not have those individuals happy. And again, you might have that quiet quitting happening, right? So we always want to make sure that we're having a balance also as we're considering sort of the hybrid return to work environment. Make it useful and valuable if you're going to have people go back to the office. Some individuals have a much better setup at home now that they feel more productive as well. So it has to be valuable and purposeful. And I would say providing some structure around it is healthy as well, right? You think about, for example, the parent that is going to pick up their child. Well, if I know that I have to be at the office every Wednesday, then I'm going to make alternative arrangements from a childcare perspective. Instead of taking my 15-minute break to pick up my kid at that time, I'm going to make arrangements because I'm not going to be available every Wednesday. Let's say I'm at the office, right? So providing as advance notice and having them, participate in, if you haven't done so yet, what's the best day, and have a consensus of when everybody might be there, if that still makes sense for your business. So what's important about communication? There's so many important aspects of communication. I would say that in my role, in my experience, a lot of issues that are related to human resources are around communication. Either it's a lack of communication or a lack of timely communication or a misunderstanding, right? When they say a picture tells a million words, well, communication can be interpreted a million ways, right? So being clear in communications, having conversation around emails, recognizing as well, what is the best form of communication? If we're going to have a very sensitive conversation about a personal situation, or let's call it like a disciplinary matter that is, difficult for that person to receive that message. Well, if you have the opportunity and the wherewithal to do so, I would say that's the best kind of communication for that is in person, right? Similarly, we can go back and forth on emails, till our face turns blue on certain subjects. There has to be a certain point where you recognize, I think I need to pick up the phone and talk to this person so they understand what I mean. Because again, things can be very misinterpreted. What I'm finding now, even like, we have we have instant messaging, we have text messaging, we have voice notes, there's so many different ways to communicate. What is the best platform and what is the best form of communication? A lot of people now, even with text messages, are sending voice notes because they don't want their tone of voice to be misinterpreted through a text message, or the message to be misinterpreted that's going to perhaps have the opposite impact or effect. So ensuring that you're communicating with the right form of communication, depending on the subject, is definitely key. Making sure that you're providing clarity. Sometimes what I do, if it's a difficult thing that someone's sharing with me, I repeat it back to them just to make sure that I'm confirming understanding, that that we're on the same page. So providing that clarity through sometimes reiterating what they're saying or even following up with the email is important. The other piece I would say that is so important and really is the way that I operate and lead in general is to communicate and to, in general, be authentic, right? If you're just checking in with people because you got to check off a box and you're getting it done, that's going to go in one ear and out the other. That's not sincere, and it actually has the opposite effect. It's like, why are they calling me and asking me the same question every month when they really don't care? What I told them the other day, my kid is sick. Like, pay attention, right? Ask them, how's your kid doing? Like, how are they sleeping at night? How's the family? Is the rest of the family? Because the reality is it's flu season, right? Or like I said, there's limited resources. So, it's not a bad thing to get personal, not too personal, but in a way that you're maintaining boundaries, but demonstrating sincere consideration for your work family and being authentic in the way. And sometimes sharing some of your experiences when we talk about sort of a mental health perspective, sometimes that's all people need to know is that, oh my God, I'm not the only one that's on this island that's dealt with this problem or this challenge in my life, right? As I mentioned, we want to lead by example. We want to make sure that we are disconnecting and, taking the breaks and having the balance ourselves as leaders. And again, encouraging that dialogue. If you can see and recognize signs of burnout or that someone is not quite themselves, well, then ask, try to understand what is happening, what is going on, and be sincere about it. The other thing is, when I go back to sort of lead by example, and being authentic. If our words are saying one thing, but our actions, I say, make sure you take your breaks, but I constantly am emailing you at night, asking you where things are at 7 o'clock. How am I? I'm really doing opposite of what I'm saying, right? So even though that's something that I might have to catch up on, send delay. Think about the impact. Is the message better if I make sure that I just send an email to book a meeting to talk about this, because there's just so much on it that I need to email and it might not be understood and it's too complex. So it's so important that, our tone, our way that we're communicating, our body language. I mean, it's hard to tell with body language, but 90% of communication is nonverbal. I don't know. Oh, sorry, 60%. I'm not sure if everyone knew that, but I was in a meeting yesterday and it wasn't in person, which was good. And we're brainstorming, we're collaborating, and someone had suggested, oh, that idea doesn't necessarily work. And one of the individuals in the room, he didn't say a word, but his face said 15 things. I said, it doesn't seem like you agree with that comment. Why, right? So let's pay attention to what are people's faces saying, or, if they're like this, their clothes, well, they're obviously uncomfortable with something, or, they get really, get their backs up because it's a very kind of touchy subject or something is bothering. You can tell, right? That's 60% of communication. So let's be attentive, not only to the words, but most importantly to the actions. And, although people say that they have an open door policy, well, many of us don't have a door that's open because we're at home, right? So make sure that you're intentional with your check-ins, that you ensure that you are sending emails or letting people know, okay, if there's something urgent, even though I'm very busy, my calendar is back to back, I always have time for you. I will find a few moments if you're dealing with something that we need to talk about because you're important to me. So those are things to always ensure that you're demonstrating that open door without the door, right? And being open and welcoming to that conversation. If someone comes to you, but you're always shooting them down, oh, I don't have time, can we talk about that? Well, you're closing the conversation before it even starts, right? So that's about it when I talk about remote work and the right to disconnect and our recent legislation, the importance, I would say, is about making sure that we're having a healthy work-life balance and demonstrating and mirroring that and leading the charge and having effective communication along the way. Any questions before I get into our bonus subject today about electronic monitoring? And if you want, we can save questions for the end as well.
My question is actually going to lead into your second part, which is that electronic monitoring. So the concern I have is that now that there's quote unquote legislation that says the right to disconnect, how far are we away from, or maybe some people are actually doing it, the right to enforce connection? Because you can't have one without the other.
You can enforce connection anytime.
That's what,
Yeah, it's about communication, I would suggest. And it's also, yes, it leads into sort of electronic monitoring. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the reality is you should be working with your team according to performance expectations and be clear on what you want them to achieve. When they get it done, as long as they're meeting deadlines, if they're over efficient or if you're not keeping abreast about their performance, let's say that you have someone that's meeting their deadlines, quality is amazing, they're always getting it done. Why does it matter if they have an extra 20 minutes? They've kind of earned it, right? However, if that's consistent, then you need to have conversations with them around, are they challenged anymore? Because they're hitting it out of the park. So, lack of performance is one thing, but it also could lead to departure, if you will, of that individual if they're not being challenged. So, underperformance or performance that is consistently met, but not continuously being challenged, both are risks to your business, because you could, in fact, have that individual leave because they want more of a challenge, or perhaps they need a different balance because they're not performing. It doesn't align with their capacity or their ability to do that job, right? So I would say you should always have those conversations. We talk about performance management. It's not just performance gone are the days where we're just doing annual reviews. We really should be having ongoing conversations. Those are not always documented. Sometimes they should be, just to provide clarity in terms of expectations, to encourage the dialogue or that career advancement or challenge, so that you're consistently engaging your team member or pushing their boundaries, expecting certain things, having them meet them or see what resources they need. So we need to always have that open dialogue around performance so that we have that connection all the time, right? So let's get into electronic monitoring. What is it? It just came out in Ontario on October 11th, so a couple weeks ago. And really, we should, again, have 25 or more employees in order to have a written policy. So this is something that is mandated. We definitely need to have a written policy around how we monitor our team members. And in 2023, we should have a policy in place before March 1st. So they're giving you a little bit of leeway, if you will. So if your organization is growing, you have some time to put this policy together. But again, it's a good opportunity to have a best practice and provide that transparency to your team members as to how you're monitoring their performance, how we're monitoring the business, and for what purpose. Because you may, in fact, have other ideas of what other monitoring might be effective to help with, business growth, or maybe what's not necessary or ineffective, and how you perhaps need to engage your team members more from a conversation and performance discussion. Okay, so there's different types of electronic monitoring. So basically, electronic monitoring is monitoring your team with any kind of form of electronic communication. So that could be our emails. Some organizations have actual systems that monitor sort of mouse activity, sensors. Others have monitoring with video surveillance. It could also be, you get into your building with a key fob, so that's, for security purposes, that's still electronic monitoring. Or, there, some of my construction clients, they have like inventory management systems that are monitored electronically. So once you take a piece of inventory off, it determines the weight and knows how much you need to replace to replenish that inventory of that product. So there's so many different forms of video electronic monitoring. Could be a GPS in a vehicle for tracking of employees, could be for safety purposes, it could be even a punch clock, right? Checking in and out. It's still an electronic sort of form of monitoring your staff. So it could be websites, like we have certain websites that we might prevent, or for prevention of viruses and things like that. We've got certain things blocked. So we're monitoring sort of online activity, right? It mentions here, like it could be a center of, the grocery store, anything really that is tracking some sort of activity and an electronic form is considered electronic monitoring. So that you can see how there's a wide variety of different types of electronic monitoring that we have. And so what is it that we need to do in order to consider? Well, we should be reflecting on what are our general practices. So how is it that we're monitoring? What is it that we're monitoring? Why is it that we're monitoring? So, when we talk about what has to be in these policies, well, we have to look at 4 different factors. The what. So what is it that we're monitoring? What is we want to describe the electronic monitor. So, okay, we have, I can tell you, in my office, we have a code to get into the door. So we have electronic monitoring of our entrance into our office. And why is it that we do that? We do that for security purposes, so that only those who have access and team members, for their safety. So we're going to share the why. What's the purpose of the monitoring? And then we may reference other policies. So, maybe it's not required necessarily by ESA, but it could say, okay, we do this so that for health and safety purposes, we're preventing sort of any kind of individuals from coming into our office unannounced, or perhaps we have, documentation that's secured in our location that is we have to ensure that we maintain privacy records. And so this is why we lock the door to this office that we have a code to. And in general, we promote safety within our workplace, and we want to make sure that everyone feels, from a cultural perspective, that if they're alone in the office, that they're not at risk. So it has to align with your culture as well, right? We want to be able to share not just as to what it is and why, but it also is referencing sort of how, like how does it align with your brand in general? How will it be monitored? At what points would we take it all, maybe change that, or would it be different? So another example might be, and then from our organizational context, like who has access to that list of who goes in and out of the building, right? So one of the other things that I would say is more common is email, right? Everyone has email. So we would describe it as we monitor electronic emails, any communication for really for tracking purposes, to ensure that we have a database of communications. Should we be called to task of within clients to clearly communicate something? If if someone leaves, we have access to that. Or if there's any kind of claim against you, we if we needed to That's why we would access it. So what are we monitoring? It's the email. Why is the purpose? What's the purpose of why we're monitoring email? And that really aligns with maybe our respect in the workplace policy, because if there's ever something that is a claim to another individual of inappropriate communication, that's how we would validate and perhaps do some investigation. Is we might pull that record. And then, how does that, who is it that would have access to that? Well, that would only be perhaps HR or the owner of the company. So it's not like it's shared with everybody, right? So we need to provide all these pieces in a policy for every form of electronic communication that you have. And it's important in general terms to be transparent. So, this came out, I had shared with my team, we're finalizing our we have till March, whatever, we have under 25 anyways, but we're finalizing our policy. But in general, when this came out, I addressed it at a team meeting. I said, hey guys, this is legislation. And as you know, we don't have to have this policy, but I want to be transparent. Yeah, I do have access to monitor your emails, to your websites. Calls can be recorded if we want to do that. And why am I doing it, right? Why is it like every organization has to have this from a risk perspective? There's so much cyber sort of security breaches, and we need to do our best to make sure we're not clicking on things, we're preventing them. That's why we monitor it as well. And then what I shared is, will I go and pull these records? Am I sitting here looking at your emails every day? No, I don't have time for that. I hired you in a profession to do your job. But if there is ever something that I need to pull and look for, then yes, I'm going to go back and look in your emails, right? So I'm just being completely transparent with my team, and it fosters that culture of trust, right? So, I shared, well, when we had so-and-so leave, for example, we had been called to task for something, their client that they were helping with. It wasn't something that I was aware of, but I thought before I go back to the client to say, no, we didn't do this, I'm going to go double check in their inbox that they just recently had departed to see if there was anything that maybe was missed. So, I gave them an example of when I would perhaps look at their email, but also it's that culture of trust. So as much as we say these things are required or not, if you're under 25, similar to the right to disconnect, it's important to have these things in place from an authenticity, from a trust, from a cultural perspective, that you're providing sort of that transparency. Yeah, we're maintaining and complying with legislation. And then you think about the opposite. If we're not complying with legislation, we're silent on the subject, it doesn't apply to us. Well, then people start to wonder, why are they silent? Is there something that they're hiding or that they don't agree with? Because even though these legislations don't apply to us, it's important. They're conversations, right? You're going to have the quiet quitting, you're going to have the turnover, and there's no need for that if you've got a really amazing workplace culture. You just want to continue to add value in the transparency and the support to your team. So I hope that helped with understanding sort of the newest legislative updates on right to disconnect and electronic monitoring. That's all I have for today. And I welcome any other questions or scenarios, whatever it is that you'd like to talk about. We've got a little bit of time now that the session information aspect is completed.
Thank you, Luisa. That was a great session. Lots of good information there. Does anybody have any questions for Luisa before we wrap it up? Nope. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Desjardins Insurance for sponsoring this this event. And thank you, Luisa, for all the wonderful information and for putting this together for us.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Thank
Luisa.
you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.